Joined by two House Democrats. They're on different sides of this impeachment issue. Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, he's in favor of opening an impeachment inquiry now. Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota is a bit of an impeachment skeptic, and he's not. So I'm going to start things off with Massachusetts Democratic Congressman and a 2020 presidential candidate, Seth Moulton. All right, Congressman Moulton, why impeachment now? Why is it now? And what was the trigger for you that said, okay, now's the time?
Well, actually, I voted for moving forward with impeachment over a year ago. It's clear that there's enough to have this debate. I mean, over 30 of the president's associates have been indicted by the Mueller probe. His campaign chairman is in prison today. So don't tell me that there's not enough to debate impeachment. Now, understand, Congress does two things. We debate things, and then we vote on them. I'm not calling for a vote on impeachment, but I am calling for having this debate, for opening this inquiry, so that we can get the facts before the American people. That's our constitutional responsibility, regardless of whether or not it's good politics at the moment.
I was just going to say, what is the more political stance?
I think the more political...
I mean, because there's an argument to be made that not impeaching is worrying too much about politics.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think that Speaker Pelosi has made a very good case for that. I mean, she's saying that it's not a good political time to talk about impeachment. She's talked about the 2020 election. I think that those are all very valid political concerns. But how about just doing the right thing by the oath that we swore to protect and defend the Constitution, not our political future, the Constitution of the United States? And balance of powers is inherent in the Constitution. We have to do our constitutional job to put a check on the executive. And by the way, that doesn't mean we can't do other good things for the country, too. I mean, we can walk and chew gum at the same time here. There's a lot of things that we will advance in a positive agenda for the country. But we have a constitutional duty to put a check on the executive and figure out what's gone on with this president.
It's our understanding that in that larger meeting with the entire Democratic caucus earlier this week, that one of the things Speaker Pelosi brought up, that she was concerned an impeachment would essentially, assuming the Republican Senate acquits him, that it would end up vindicating and clearing him. And that was a concern, that actually you go through this process and you vindicate him rather than highlighting and surfacing what appear to be constitutional violations.
Everybody knows that the Republican Party is just lining up behind the president, regardless of whether it's the morally right thing to do. So I don't think it would be any surprise if we were to actually hold that vote, which I'm not calling for today, but if we were to hold that vote and it were to go to the Senate and a whole bunch of senators would do the wrong thing and just support the president because that's the political thing for them to do. But I think the American people is smarter. I think the American people are smarter than that. I think they can see through, and I think that if we do a better job of explaining what this Mueller report is all about, the clear violations of the Constitution that the president has been carrying out since the first day he came into office, that the American people will understand the right thing to do here. But it's incumbent upon us to make that case, and we can't make that case, we can't even have that debate if we're not opening an inquiry.
Now, one of the other arguments against starting impeachment is that it gets in the way of the presidential race. You happen to be somebody calling for an impeachment inquiry and running for president. Are you concerned that it drowns out the other issues you want to talk about?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. That's why I spent the last week talking about how we can bring this country together with an ambitious new national service program. That's why we had a hearing on single-payer health care before the Budget Committee. I'm the vice chairman of the Budget Committee here in Congress, and I have some concerns about single-payer health care, even though I want to make sure every American gets health care because I see it firsthand when I go to the VA. So the point is that we're talking about other issues. We're moving forward on a positive agenda for the American people, addressing people's concerns.
I'm sorry. You and I both know once an impeachment inquiry is started, that sucks all the oxygen out of the room.
Well, I don't know if it sucks all the oxygen out of the room, but I will say this. We've done a lot of great things in the House that the Senate has already rejected anyway. So we're going to keep doing those great things. But Mitch McConnell is not going to. I don't know what the oxygen is that's really left here. So how about just doing the right thing? I mean, that's at the end of the day what I'm talking about, Chuck. Is just do the right thing by the Constitution. And I think that if you do the right thing at the end of the day, you'll be vindicated by the American people.
Well, we already stopped using the Electoral College procedure in the Constitution, which some would argue Madison would have come back. If he were to come back to life, he would say, we gave you the tool, you refused to use it. Let me ask you this. Is there a date too close to the 2020 election that makes impeachment essentially impossible?
I haven't even thought about that. Maybe there is. But again, that's a political calculation. And I think what we're tired of right now, what the American people are tired of, as I go around the country and listen to voters, is this political bickering. It's the back and forth that, frankly, you detailed at the start of the show. That's what we want to get past. And we get past that by not playing into those politics, but by rising above it, by doing the right thing by the Constitution. And I think if you do that, at the end of the day, the American people will appreciate it.
Speaking of rising above it, it is not easy to rise above sometimes with the president. Do you support how Nancy Pelosi has gone back and forth with him here, or do you think this is devolving into a sort of a name-calling spat that's going to get unhealthy for everybody?
Well, I mean, I think almost every conversation with the president devolves into some sort of name-calling spat. But Speaker Pelosi is doing a good job of standing up to the president, and it's clearly getting under his skin.
Congressman Moulton, I appreciate it. Thank you. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.